Hello, I'm Arnaud. My son-in-law Alan decided to ruin my daughter's wedding day in front of everyone. He walked in with a lawyer in tow and demanded I hand over the farm deed like it was his, my own flesh and blood, humiliated me in the worst possible way. But this wasn't the end. This battle for my dignity, for my legacy, was just beginning. And you won't believe what I did next. How far would you go to protect everything you've worked for your whole life? Trust me, you won't see what happens coming. The sun was just beginning to dip below the horizon as the ceremony unfolded. It was a small, intimate gathering in a charming rural church just outside our little town in California. The afternoon air was warm, a light breeze swirling through the open windows. Inside, the scent of lilies filled the room, and there was a sense of calm anticipation in the air. My daughter, Grace, was about to walk down the aisle. I couldn't help but reflect on the years that had brought me here. My hands, worn from decades of hard work on the family farm, trembled slightly as I adjusted my tie. In some ways, it felt as if the whole of my life had led to this moment. Grace, my only child, was about to marry Alan, a young man I had come to accept as family. As I watched Grace glide down the aisle in her wedding dress, my heart swelled with pride. She was my girl, the one I had poured my everything into. I thought about her mother, long gone now. I thought about how, in many ways, this day was for her too. But even as I smiled, a knot tightened in my chest. I'd worked hard, fought hard to give Grace everything she needed. The farm, the house, the life we'd built, those were my gifts to her. Now, as she moved forward into her new life, I wondered if she'd truly understand the sacrifices made for her. Alan and Grace had their whole lives ahead of them. But in the back of my mind, I knew that things weren't as simple as they seemed. As I stood there watching my daughter marry the man she loved, a shadow seemed to creep in at the edges of my joy. But I shook it off. Today was a day for celebration. It was only when the reception moved into full swing that things started to shift. The sounds of laughter and clinking glasses filled the room, the hum of chatter weaving through the atmosphere. Guests mingled, congratulated the newlyweds, and I stood there, a quiet figure in the back. I couldn't help but smile. This was my family's moment, and despite everything, I was proud of it. But then it happened. Alan approached me, his eyes cold, hard, with a determination I hadn't seen before. He wasn't the same cheerful young man who had once joked with me on the farm. No, this was someone else entirely, someone I hadn't recognized in the time I'd known him. Without warning, Alan stepped closer, and to my surprise, a man in a suit followed him, holding a briefcase. I blinked, unsure of what I was seeing. "Dad," Alan said, his voice unnervingly calm, "it's time you handed over the deed to the farm." I froze. The words didn't make sense at first. I thought I misheard him. "The deed?" I asked, confused, my voice trembling slightly. "What are you talking about?" Alan didn't hesitate. He continued, his words cutting through the air. "Grace needs to take over. You're getting too old to handle the farm. It's in everyone's best interest if you hand it over now." My heart sank. What was this? Was this some kind of joke? No one laughed. The atmosphere shifted, turning awkward. The faces around us blurred as if time had momentarily frozen. The guests began murmuring, their whispers filling the space. No one seemed to know what to do. The reception had come to a halt, and all eyes were on me. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This was my farm, my legacy. It had been in my family for generations. I had worked every day of my life to build this. And now, on the day of my daughter's wedding, Alan was demanding it. I looked at Grace, who was across the room, unaware of the conversation unfolding. She had her back turned, chatting with some of her friends. The last thing I wanted was to make a scene, but this wasn't just any conversation. It was a demand, an insult. My blood began to boil, but I took a deep breath. "No," I said firmly, though my voice trembled with the weight of the moment. "I won't give it to you." The tension in the air was so thick it felt suffocating. For a long moment, Alan just stood there staring at me. The room was deathly silent, save for the low murmurs from the guests. And then, without warning, Alan's hand shot out, striking me across the face with such force that I stumbled backward. The slap echoed through the room, and I couldn't believe what had just happened. There I was, standing in front of my daughter's wedding guests, my cheeks stinging from the blow. I had never been slapped in my life. Not by anyone, least of all by someone I had called family. The crowd gasped, the room vibrating with shock and disbelief. Some people seemed paralyzed, unsure of what to do, while others began to whisper in low voices. Some of them looked at me with pity, others with silent judgment. The shame, the humiliation, was unbearable. I couldn't even look at Grace. I didn't want her to see this. She hadn't seen the slap. She didn't know what had just transpired, but I knew that once she did, everything would change. I felt rage building inside me, but it wasn't just rage, it was a crushing sense of betrayal. Here I was, the man who had given everything to this family, being slapped in front of everyone. It was a moment I couldn't undo, a wound that would never heal. I stepped away from Alan, my legs shaking, and turned toward the exit. The room seemed to spin as I walked out. The bright sunlight outside hit me like a slap of its own, but I didn't care. I needed to get away. I stood there for a moment, my heart pounding in my chest, still shaking from the shock. The hum of the reception seemed so far away now, as if I were standing on the outside looking in. I walked out of the hall, still shaking, wondering how I let things get this far, but I wasn't done yet. I stood outside the reception hall, my back against the cold brick wall. The evening was settling in, the sunlight fading slowly into the cool embrace of night. A chill ran through the air, a sharp contrast to the heated moment I had just endured inside. The slap from Alan still stung on my cheek, a bitter reminder of what had just happened. I could feel the burn of humiliation, but there was something else growing inside me now, something that had been dormant for too long. I wasn't sure how long I had been standing there, but it felt like hours. My thoughts were scattered, running in 100 different directions. The day, which should have been a celebration, had turned into something I never could have imagined. How had it come to this? How had my own son-in-law humiliated me so publicly in front of my daughter, in front of the guests? I was supposed to be the one in control, the head of this family. I had spent my life building something from nothing, working day and night to provide for Grace, to make sure she had everything she needed. And now Alan, this man I had trusted, was trying to take everything away from me. My legacy, my farm, my pride. The questions swirled in my head, but there was no answer. Only the overwhelming feeling of being completely powerless. I needed to think. I needed to do something. I couldn't just let this go. I couldn't walk away from my own family's history without a fight. Without really thinking about it, I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking, but I managed to dial the number I had been avoiding for weeks. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Then the familiar voice on the other end answered. Hello? It was Mike, an old friend of mine, more than a friend, really. He was the lawyer I'd worked with years ago when I was first starting out, trying to protect the farm. We hadn't spoken in a while, but I knew I needed him now more than ever. Mike, I said, trying to steady my voice. It's Arnaud. I need your help. There was a pause on the other end. Then he asked, What's going on? I could feel the weight of the words as I said them, each one a slow, painful release. Alan, he's demanding that I hand over the deed to the farm, in front of everyone, at the wedding. He's got a lawyer with him, and he says I'm too old to manage it anymore. Mike's voice was calm, but I could hear the surprise in his tone. What? Arnaud, are you sure? I'm sure, I replied. He slapped me, right there in front of everyone when I refused. It's too much. I can't just let him take what's mine. The frustration in my voice was impossible to hide. I was shaking with anger now, but it wasn't just anger. It was a feeling of deep betrayal. This wasn't just a legal battle. This was my life, my family, being torn apart by someone I had trusted. There was a long silence on the other end, and then Mike spoke again, his voice firm. You can't let this go, Arnaud. You've worked too hard for too long. We'll handle this. I'll get the paperwork you need. You have a right to defend what's yours. A small wave of relief washed over me. It wasn't much, but it was something. For the first time since the wedding, I felt like I wasn't alone in this. Mike was going to help me. He wasn't just some distant lawyer. He was a friend who had been there for me before, and now he was going to help me fight for my dignity, for my farm, and for my family. I'll need you to come down here, Mike, I said, my voice calmer now, but still filled with determination. I'm not going to let Alan get away with this. I'm going to fight. Arnaud, Mike said, his voice softer now. I know you are, and I'll be there as soon as I can. Just don't do anything rash. We'll take care of it the right way. I hung up the phone and stood there for a moment, my mind still racing. The reception hall was still visible from where I stood, the lights flickering through the windows, the sounds of laughter and clinking glasses muffled in the distance. I knew I couldn't go back inside, not like this. Not with the rage still bubbling inside me, not with the humiliation still fresh on my skin. I wasn't sure what was going to happen next, but I knew this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. I took a deep breath, straightened my back, and walked away from the hall, leaving behind the mess that had been made. The next few days would decide everything. I just had to make sure I was ready. The quiet of the house seemed to weigh down on me as I sat alone in my study, a glass of whiskey in hand. The night had crept up without me noticing, the sky outside growing darker, mirroring the storm brewing inside. The events from the wedding still echoed in my mind, each moment replaying over and over like a loop I couldn't escape. I could still feel the sting on my cheek from Alan's slap, still hear the sound of it in my head. It wasn't just the physical pain, it was the humiliation. The anger too, a mixture of things that churned inside me. I took a long sip of the whiskey, letting the burn settle in my throat, hoping it would calm me. But nothing could. Nothing could wipe away what had just happened. Nothing could erase the sting of what Alan had done. I had spent my whole life working for this family. My farm, my name, my legacy. And now here I was, standing in the ruins of everything I had built. For what? For him. For Grace to marry a man who thought so little of me, the more I thought about it, the angrier I got. The more I realized that I couldn't let this slide. I couldn't let Alan just walk over me like that, let him take everything that mattered. I wasn't some weak old man, no matter how old I was. I picked up my phone again, the memory of my conversation with Mike still fresh in my mind. The lawyer had been clear, insistent. I had to take action. Now. The longer I waited, the more I risked losing everything. And I wasn't going to let that happen. Not like this. With a deep breath, I dialed Mike's number again. He answered on the second ring, his voice low and steady. "Arnaud, you there?" "I'm here," I said, my voice rougher than I intended. "I've thought it over. I can't just sit by and let him do this. I need to fight back. I want to take action." I could hear the relief in his voice. "That's what I was hoping to hear. We'll make this right, Arnaud. We'll get the documents, the proof you need, but you need to come to me tomorrow. It's time to move." I swallowed hard, nodding, even though he couldn't see me. "Tomorrow," I said. "I'll be there." After hanging up, I sat back in my chair, the weight of what I was about to do settling over me. I wasn't just fighting for my farm anymore. I wasn't just fighting to keep my dignity. No, this was more than that. This was about standing up for myself after all these years of swallowing my pride. It was about taking control again, about not letting Alan or anyone strip away everything I'd worked for. I didn't even hear the door creak open. "Dad?" It was Grace. I turned around to face her, trying to mask the turmoil inside. She stood in the doorway, her eyes wide with concern. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. For a moment, I just looked at her, taking in the way she seemed so unaware of the storm that was brewing. How could I tell her everything? How could I tell her what had happened today, what Alan had done? I didn't want to bring this to her, not on her wedding day. "I'm fine," I said, forcing a smile. "Just thinking." She stepped into the room, her gaze lingering on me for a moment longer before she nodded. "Okay, well, just remember, I'm here if you need me." "Thanks, Grace," I said, my voice gruff again. "I know you are." She left, the door clicking softly behind her. As the silence settled back around me, I could feel the weight of the decision I had made. Tomorrow, I was going to fight. As I stood up from the chair and walked over to my desk, I caught sight of something that made me stop. It was an old family photo album. I hadn't opened it in years. It sat there, gathering dust as if mocking me. Slowly I reached for it, my hands trembling just a little as I opened the cover. The pages inside were yellowed with age, but they were filled with memories. My late wife, Grace as a child, the farm in its prime, before it all started to slip away. I ran my fingers over the pages, each photograph pulling me back in time. I remembered the sacrifices I'd made for this family, the long hours in the fields, the late nights in the barn. I remembered how hard it had been to keep it all together after she passed. And then there was Grace, my daughter, my only reason for pushing through it all. I closed the album with a snap, the weight of the memories settling deep in my chest. I was doing this for her, for me, for us. I grabbed the phone again and called Mike to confirm the meeting. I wasn't going to let Alan take everything. I wasn't going to let my family's legacy be reduced to a mere transaction. The fight was coming, and I would be ready. The morning light filtered through the curtains, casting soft beams across the wooden floor of my study. I sat there in the silence, the weight of the day before still heavy on my chest. The calm of the early morning was deceptive. Outside, the world was waking up, but inside, my mind was already racing. I could still feel the slap on my face, the sting that lingered long after the sound had faded. Alan had humiliated me, and yet, as much as I wanted to crawl into myself, I knew one thing. I couldn't let this go on. I took a deep breath, placing my glass of whiskey on the desk, the cool of the glass grounding me. I had spent years, decades, building a life for my family, my farm, my name. It was all at risk. And Alan thought he could just come in and take it from me. My daughter's wedding had become the battleground, and I was not going to walk away from this fight. I thought back to my conversation with Mike, the lawyer. He had been direct. "You have to act, Arnaud. He's playing you, but you can turn this around." And he was right. I had to turn this around. The thought of losing everything I'd worked for was unbearable. But this wasn't just about property. It was about my dignity. The anger I felt yesterday started to settle into a quiet resolve. I wasn't going to be passive anymore. I had the tools, I had the law on my side, and most importantly, I had something Alan would never understand: strength. I got up from my chair, walked over to the desk, and began pulling out the old documents. The farm deed was right where I left it. I ran my fingers over the worn paper, memories flooding back of the countless hours spent working the land, of my wife, gone too soon, of Grace, my daughter, the light of my life. I couldn't let her future be taken away from her. The phone rang, breaking my thoughts. It was Mike. "You ready?" he asked, his voice steady. "I'm ready," I said, gripping the phone tighter. "I'm going to confront him today." "Good. Now let me know when you're ready to meet. I'll have everything in place," Mike replied, his tone reassuring. I ended the call and took another look at the documents, checking them once more. Everything had to be perfect. Alan thought he had the upper hand, but he was about to learn that I wasn't a man to be pushed around. The day stretched on, and as the time for the confrontation approached, I felt the tension build in my chest. I could feel it in my bones, the calm before the storm. My hand hovered over the phone, dialing Alan's number. I wasn't looking forward to the conversation, but I knew it had to happen. The man was nothing but a bully, and I was going to stand up to him. When Alan answered, his voice was annoyingly casual. "Arnaud, what's up?" "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady, though my hands clenched at my sides. "Meet me now." There was a pause on the other end. "About what? The farm?" Alan's voice was mocking, dismissive. He wasn't taking me seriously, and that was just fine. "Yes, the farm," I replied, my jaw tightening. "I'll be there in an hour. You better be ready to listen." "I'll be ready," he said, before hanging up. I felt a spark of satisfaction at his arrogance. Alan had no idea what was coming. He thought he could bully me, humiliate me, and get away with it. But he was wrong. This wasn't just about the farm. It was about me taking my life back. I made my way to the door, my mind running over what I was about to do. As I stepped outside, the cool breeze hit my face, and for a moment, I let it settle my nerves. But deep down, I knew this fight wasn't going to be easy. Alan was going to do everything he could to manipulate the situation, to control the narrative. But that's not how this was going to go down. This time, I was in charge. This time, I would stand my ground. The drive to meet Alan felt like it took forever. I could feel the weight of the confrontation looming over me, but as I got closer, I knew it was the only choice. There was no turning back now. As I arrived at the meeting point, I took a deep breath. This was it. I walked into the room and immediately spotted Alan. He was leaning against the desk, looking at his phone as if nothing in the world was going to faze him. His cocky grin made my blood boil, but I stood tall. I wasn't backing down. Not this time. "I'm here," I said, my voice low and steady. "Let's talk." His smile faltered for a split second, but then he recovered. "What's this all about, Arno? You're wasting your time." "You think you're in control," I said, my fists clenching, "but you're not. This isn't just about the farm. This is about respect, and I won't let you take what's mine." Alan's eyes narrowed, and for a moment there was silence. I could see the wheels turning in his head. He hadn't expected me to come at him like this. "Well," Alan finally said, a smirk creeping onto his face again, "we'll see about that, won't we?" The tension between us was thick enough to cut with a knife. I could feel my heart racing, but I didn't flinch. I wasn't going to back down. "I'm not done yet," I said, my voice firm. "Not by a long shot." The morning light streamed softly through the blinds, illuminating the quiet living room. The house was still, and I was alone with my thoughts. The events of the past few days had hit me like a freight train, but I wasn't going to let this break me. I had a purpose now, a reason to move forward. The fight for my land, for my dignity, was just beginning. I sat at my desk, papers spread in front of me like a battlefield, each one representing a piece of what was mine, what Alan had no right to take. The weight of the upcoming legal battle pressed heavily on my chest, but with each deep breath, I felt a growing sense of resolve. I had spent my whole life building this farm, raising my daughter, working hard for everything I owned. Alan's audacity to challenge me, to think he could waltz in and claim it all, was beyond the pale. I glanced at the family photo on my desk, a snapshot of better days. Grace was a little girl in that picture, her smile wide and full of innocence. I thought about how proud I was of her, how hard I worked to make sure she would never have to struggle like I did growing up. But now, Alan was trying to take it all away. The anger from the wedding confrontation was still fresh in my mind, but now it was transforming into something far more powerful: determination. I wasn't going to roll over. Not this time. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. I picked it up without hesitation. "Mike," I said, my voice steady, "we're doing this." "Good," Mike replied. "I'll be there in an hour." I hung up, feeling a surge of anticipation. This was it, the moment I'd been waiting for. The first step toward reclaiming what was mine. As I prepared for the meeting, I couldn't help but replay the last few weeks in my head. How had it all come to this? How had Alan convinced himself that he could simply waltz in and take everything from me? He thought he could just strip away the years of hard work, the blood, sweat, and tears I'd poured into that farm, and I wasn't about to let that happen. I straightened my papers, pulling the farm deed from the stack. The document, though simple in appearance, held the weight of everything I had worked for. I ran my fingers over the worn edges of the paper, grounding myself. This was more than just a piece of paper. It was a symbol of my life's work, my legacy. When Mike arrived, he wasted no time. He had a folder full of legal documents, each one a necessary step toward taking control of the situation. As he laid them out, I could see the weight of the battle ahead, but I also saw the possibility of victory. "We're going to fight this, Arno," Mike said, his voice firm. "We'll start by gathering evidence, proof of ownership, witnesses, everything we need. Alan's claims are baseless, but we need to be thorough." I nodded, my thoughts racing. The fight for the farm wasn't just about property. It was about my place in this world, my identity. I had given everything to build this life, and I wasn't about to let Alan take it from me, not without a fight. Mike went over the legal process with me, explaining the steps we'd need to take. It was going to be a long, drawn-out battle. But as he spoke, something within me clicked. This wasn't just about winning a legal case. This was about standing my ground, about showing Alan and everyone else that I wasn't going to be pushed around. I had a right to what was mine, and I was going to fight for it. "I'm ready," I said, my voice firmer than it had been in days. Mike gave a small nod, clearly satisfied. "Good. Let's get started." I picked up the pen and signed the first document. It was a simple form, but it felt like the beginning of something much larger. It felt like the start of a battle that I was finally ready to fight. The weight of the decision didn't hit me immediately, but as I signed, I realized that everything had changed. This was no longer about what had happened at the wedding. It was about my future and the future of my family. Once the papers were signed, Mike looked at me. "This is going to take time, Arnaud, but we'll get there. We just need to be ready." I nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. I wasn't backing down. Not anymore. As I left the office, the reality of the situation settled in. The battle had only just begun, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control. I had a plan, and I wasn't going to let Alan or anyone else take that from me. I thought back to my family, to Grace, and I knew this was about more than just the farm. This was about showing her what it meant to stand up for what's right, to fight for your future, no matter the cost. The legal battle was ahead, and it was going to be a hard road. But I was ready for whatever came next. The courtroom was quiet, almost too quiet as I stood at the entrance. The weight of what was about to happen pressed down on me like a ton of bricks. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat louder than the last. The air felt thick, suffocating almost, as I gathered the strength to step forward. Alan was already inside, sitting in his corner with his lawyer beside him, their heads close as they exchanged whispers. His smug expression was enough to make my blood boil, but I kept my face neutral. This wasn't about him. It was about me reclaiming my life, my legacy. I walked into the room slowly, my footsteps heavy on the cold, hard floor. I could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on me, but I didn't let it faze me. I was here for a reason. I was here to fight, to stand up for everything I had worked for. The tension was palpable, and though I was anxious, I was determined. This wasn't just a legal battle, it was personal. This was about defending my honor, my pride, and my family's future. As I took my seat, I couldn't help but feel a sense of déjà vu. The last time I was in a courtroom, I was much younger, fighting for something else entirely. But now, as I sat here, it was different. The stakes were higher. This time, it wasn't just a case. It was my whole life on the line. The thought of Alan walking away with what was mine made my stomach turn. But I wasn't going to let that happen. I had come too far to back down now. Alan's lawyer stood up first, launching into his opening statements. His words were smooth, calculated. He painted me as a frail, elderly man who no longer had the capacity to manage the farm. He tried to make it sound like I was out of touch, that I couldn't possibly keep the land in the family. He didn't know the first thing about me. As he spoke, I felt my anger grow. He didn't know the countless nights I had spent tending to the farm, the sweat, the sacrifices. He didn't know how hard I had fought to keep it all together, how many times I had been knocked down and picked myself back up. He didn't know the first thing about my life, and yet here he was, trying to take it all away. But then my lawyer, Mike, stood up. His presence was steady, reassuring. He was the one person I trusted completely in this mess. He began to dismantle Alan's claims piece by piece with the kind of precision only a seasoned lawyer could have. He didn't get rattled. He didn't raise his voice. He just calmly and methodically proved that Alan's argument was full of holes. My ownership of the farm was rock solid. There was no legal basis for Alan's claims, and Mike made sure the court knew that. I felt a flicker of confidence as Mike spoke. For the first time since this whole thing began, I felt like I might actually have a shot at winning. But I knew better than to get too comfortable. This was far from over. One wrong move, one slip up, and it could all come crashing down. Alan's lawyer was ruthless, and I had no illusions about what was at stake. As Mike finished his argument, I took a deep breath and glanced at Alan. His arrogance hadn't faded. He still sat there, his arms crossed, looking like he thought the whole thing was a joke. But I could see the cracks in his armor. I could see the doubt starting to creep in. I wasn't just defending my farm anymore. I was defending my right to be respected, my right to exist on my own terms. I wasn't going to let Alan take that from me. The judge called for a short recess, and as I stood up to stretch my legs, I couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. This wasn't just a fight for land. This was about my dignity, my family, my legacy, and I wasn't about to let anyone take that away from me. The tension in the room was thick as the break ended, and we all took our seats again. I glanced at Alan, who still had that smug look on his face, but something had shifted. The cocky confidence he had shown earlier was now tempered with a hint of uncertainty. I wasn't going to back down. I wasn't going to let him walk away with everything. The judge called the court to order and the proceedings continued. But I could feel it in the air. The turning point had arrived. This was it, the final stand. The gavel came down, and I could feel the weight of it, the finality in the air. But the decision wasn't made yet. The judge's gaze swept over the room, and for a moment it felt like time had stopped. The final verdict still hung in the air, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. I knew one thing for sure. The fight wasn't over, it was just beginning. The courthouse was buzzing with energy as I stepped through the doors. The final hearing. This was it. I could feel the weight of the years of hard work bearing down on me, each step heavier than the last. My heart was pounding, but I refused to show any sign of weakness. Alan was sitting on the other side of the room, a smug grin plastered on his face. His lawyer leaned in, whispering in his ear, no doubt preparing for the next move in this long and grueling battle. I took a deep breath. I wasn't going to back down. This wasn't just about the farm anymore. This was about my pride, my dignity, everything I had fought for over the years. As I made my way to my seat, I could feel the tension in the room building. The stakes had never been higher. This was a fight I had to win, no matter the cost. The judge entered and the room fell silent. It was time to begin. My lawyer, Victor, gave me a reassuring glance before he turned his attention to the judge. Alan's lawyer began by presenting their case, but I didn't care about their words. They were all just noise, trying to drown out the truth. Alan's lawyer went on about my so-called incompetence, claiming that I wasn't fit to manage the farm anymore. They said I had been hiding assets, trying to manipulate things in my favor. The accusations were outrageous, but they weren't surprising. They were just another attempt to undermine everything I had built. Then, Alan's lawyer dropped the bombshell. They presented new evidence. Documents they claimed proved that I had been hiding assets linked to the farm. The room went quiet as the papers were passed around. I could feel my blood pressure rising. I didn't know where they had gotten these papers, but I knew they were lies, pure lies. They were trying to destroy me. My hands clenched into fists, but I forced myself to stay calm. Victor stood up, his expression hard as he took the documents and examined them. There was no way they could be legitimate, but I had to remain focused. I couldn't let the lies throw me off track. Not now. Victor began his counter-arguments, disassembling their case with the precision of a surgeon. He poked holes in their claims, exposed the flaws in their evidence, and made it clear that this was nothing more than a last-ditch attempt to get what they wanted. But still, the tension lingered. The fight was far from over. As the argument continued, I felt a sudden shift inside me. Something snapped. I couldn't just sit there and take this anymore. I had been passive for too long, allowing Alan and his lawyer to control the narrative. I wasn't going to let them walk all over me any longer. It was time to take matters into my own hands. I turned to Victor. "I need to do something," I said, my voice low but firm. He looked at me, surprised, but I didn't wait for his approval. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a small recorder. I had been holding onto this piece of evidence for days, waiting for the right moment to use it. Victor's eyes widened as he understood what I was about to do. He quickly moved to the front of the room, speaking to the judge. "Your Honor, we have a new piece of evidence that we would like to present." The judge gave a nod, and I knew the moment had arrived. I stood up, my heart pounding in my chest. I pressed the button on the recorder, and Alan's voice filled the room. "I knew I could manipulate the will," Alan's voice said, dripping with arrogance. "I've been planning this for months. No one will believe that old fool." The room went deathly silent. I could see the color drain from Alan's face as his own words echoed through the courtroom. His smug expression was gone, replaced by a look of pure shock. The sound of his confession seemed to hang in the air, suffocating everyone in the room. I felt a sense of triumph surge through me. This was it. The truth had been exposed. Alan had played his hand, and now everyone could see who he truly was. His whole case, his entire manipulation, had crumbled in an instant. I couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope rise within me. This was my chance to claim what was rightfully mine. But as the judge called for a brief recess, I knew that the battle wasn't over yet. Alan was down, but he wasn't out. There was still much more to be done. The fight had only just begun. I sat back down, my heart still racing. Alan's lawyer had no more words, but I could see the anger building in his eyes. He was furious, and I knew that he wouldn't give up easily. But for the first time in this entire process, I felt like I had the upper hand. The truth was on my side, and I wasn't going to let Alan take it from me. The judge stood to his feet and declared a break in the proceedings. As I gathered my thoughts, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was the turning point. The final showdown had begun, and I was ready for whatever came next. The courtroom felt like a pressure cooker, the air thick with anticipation as I stood beside Victor. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears, each beat a reminder of what was at stake. The final judgment was drawing near. I had been through this process before, but this time it felt different. The weight of my entire life, the years of hard work, the countless hours spent in the fields, everything I had built was hanging in the balance. I glanced over at Alan, who sat across from me, his face an unreadable mask. His lawyer stood next to him, whispering something into his ear. The smugness was gone from Alan's expression, but I could tell it was still there, lurking just beneath the surface. The man had no shame, but today he was going to face the consequences of his actions. The judge entered, and the room fell silent. The proceedings were about to begin, and I could feel my nerves settle into a quiet determination. This was it. The final strike. I had already laid my cards on the table, revealing Alan's manipulations. Now I had to see this through to the end. Victor leaned in, his voice low. Whatever happens, we've done everything we could. You fought for this. I nodded, but my mind was racing. This was no longer just about the farm. It was about everything, my legacy, my dignity, and my right to be treated with respect. Alan had tried to destroy all of that, but today, I was going to take it all back. Then, the judge made an unexpected announcement. The court will be adjourned for further deliberation. A final ruling will be made shortly. My stomach dropped. A delay. My mind raced. What did that mean? Was this a good thing? Or was I about to lose everything? I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. The uncertainty gnawed at me. My hands clenched into fists at my sides. The one thing I had relied on, the fact that the truth would prevail, was now hanging in limbo. I couldn't afford to lose my nerve now. I turned to Victor, searching his face for any hint of reassurance. What does this mean? I asked, my voice tight with anxiety. Victor gave me a steady look, his expression grim. It's not uncommon, Arnaud. They just want to make sure they've reviewed everything thoroughly, but don't worry, we've presented the truth. I nodded, but I didn't feel reassured. The time was slipping away and the pressure was mounting. I couldn't let the fear get to me. Not now. Not after everything I had been through. As I sat there, my mind began to spin. I thought about everything I had sacrificed for this day, the long hours working on the farm, the sweat, the blood, and the countless nights spent worrying about the future. I thought about Grace, my daughter, and how she would be affected by this. I had to win, not just for me, but for her too. I had to protect what was rightfully mine. After what felt like an eternity, the court reconvened. The judge began to speak, but before he could get a word out, Victor's phone rang. The sound sliced through the tense silence like a knife. Victor answered it quickly, his eyes narrowing as he listened. I could feel the tension between us, thick as ever. Victor's voice was quiet but firm when he hung up. Alan's lawyer just offered to settle out of court. He wants to offer you compensation for the farm. I blinked, taken aback. A settlement. After everything we had gone through, after Alan had tried to take everything from me, now he wanted to buy me off. No, I said sharply. This is not about money. This is about respect. This is about my dignity. I won't let him get away with this. Victor didn't argue. He nodded, and I could see the respect in his eyes. I knew you'd say that, he said, but I think it's important we discuss it. It might be a trap to make you look weak. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. Of course it was a trap. Alan didn't want to lose. He'd do anything to avoid that. But I couldn't be bought, not like this. We're not settling, I said, my voice steady but filled with conviction. This isn't over until I say it's over. The court proceedings were still ongoing, but my mind was already racing ahead. The stakes had never been higher. The truth had already come out, but there was still more to be done. Alan had tried to manipulate everything, but I wasn't going to let him control the narrative. This was my fight, and I was going to see it through to the end. As I sat there, waiting for the judge's final decision, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was my last chance. The world seemed to slow down as I took in the weight of the moment. The gavel would come down soon, but I wasn't ready to give in. My hands trembled slightly as I clutched the papers in front of me. Everything I had worked for was on the line. But one thing was clear. I wasn't going to let Alan win. Not now, not ever. As the judge's gavel came down, I took a deep breath, knowing that this was just the beginning of the end. The final battle was about to begin, and I was ready for whatever came next. The silence in my home felt heavy, but there was a strange peace about it. The court case was over. The final judgment had been made. I had won, but somehow the victory felt hollow. I sat alone at my kitchen table, the weight of it all pressing down on me. The papers from the court, the letters, the documents confirming the transfer of the farm deed, everything was in front of me. I had come a long way since that day at Grace's wedding, when I'd been humiliated by Alan's demands. The memory still stung. It was hard to believe how much had happened in such a short time. The battle for the farm had cost me more than I had anticipated, not just in time, energy, and money, but in emotions too. I had fought to reclaim my land, my honor, but I knew that something deeper had been lost along the way. The room was still. I could hear the ticking of the clock, the soft hum of the refrigerator. It felt like the world had slowed down, as though I were the only one left in it. I looked at the papers on the table. The deed was officially in my name, but despite the triumph, my heart felt heavy. The victory didn't undo the damage that had been done. It didn't fix the cracks in my relationship with Grace, or the years of tension with Alan that couldn't be erased by a court decision. A soft knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. I got up and opened it to find Grace standing there, looking uncertain. She hadn't been around much since the trial, and I couldn't blame her. What had happened between us, the arguments, the betrayal, the fallout from the whole mess with Alan, had left a mark. "Dad?" she said softly, stepping inside. I nodded and gestured for her to sit. "I'm glad you came," I said, trying to keep the emotion from my voice. There was a weight in the room, a tension that neither of us had been able to shake off. We had both been through too much, and yet here we were, facing each other across a table filled with papers that told the story of everything that had gone wrong. Grace sat down, her eyes darting to the stack of documents. "I saw the letter," she said quietly. "The deed is in your name." I nodded again, the ache in my chest growing. "Yes, it is. The fight's over. I've won." She hesitated before speaking again. "I don't know how to feel about it. I mean, I'm relieved that the farm is yours again, but—" She trailed off, her words heavy. I knew what she was thinking. She wasn't sure where she stood. After everything Alan had done, after all the lies, the manipulation, it was hard for her to separate the man she had married from the family she had left. "You don't have to feel anything you're not ready to," I said gently. "I'm just glad we're still here." She let out a deep breath, her shoulders slumping. "I still don't know what to do with all of this. I'm angry with Alan, but at the same time, he's still my husband. I don't know how to move forward with everything that's happened." Her words hit me like a blow to the chest. It wasn't just about the farm. It was about the damage done to our family, to her relationship with Alan, and to the bond we once shared. This wasn't just about land. It was about our lives. "I don't have all the answers, Grace," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "But what I do know is that I can't change what happened. I can't undo the past. I can only move forward, and I hope you can too." There was a long pause as Grace looked at the papers on the table. Her eyes flickered with confusion and sorrow. "I'm sorry, Dad. I don't know what to do, but I appreciate everything you've done for us. For me." I could feel the gap between us, the lingering mistrust, but I didn't know how to bridge it. It wasn't just about the farm. It was about the damage done to us all, and that was something I couldn't fix with a few words or a signature. I sighed and ran a hand through my hair. "I know you're struggling with this, and I am too. But no matter what happens, we're still family. We'll figure this out. We have to." As Grace stood to leave, she paused at the door. "I'm proud of you, Dad. I just wish it didn't have to be like this." Her words were bittersweet, and for a moment, I felt like the walls had come down just a little. "I wish that too," I said quietly, watching her leave. I sat back down at the table, staring at the papers before me. The deed was mine now, but I knew that winning the farm hadn't been the hardest part. The hardest part was rebuilding the relationships that had been torn apart along the way. For the first time in years, I could finally breathe. The weight of the battle had lifted, but it felt like a hollow victory. The fight for the land was over, but the real work, the healing, was just about to begin.